Okay, first things first. There is one listener who lives in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, who has listened to every single episode, or nearly every single episode of the podcast. So you're the greatest of all time, and I appreciate you more than life itself. But this week, we're talking about biology. And I studied biology for 4 years in university, so you better believe we're going to have to talk about it a couple of times. My friend Tyler has joined us before on episode 11 of What Makes You Happy, so go stream that. But he's back to help me educate the masses. So this week, our episode on the ethics of conservation is split into 2 parts. In part 1, we talked about sustainability, carbon levels, the mixing of the oceans, and the ethics of our society surrounding conservation. And then in part 2 of the episode, we talked about recycling, the need for a more efficient system, our carbon footprints, and the Jenny Ocean Cleanup Project. I hope you're enjoying season 2 of The Fork in the Road as much as I am, and I hope you're ready to join me in giving my brother a warm welcome back to the conversation. Tyler, it was a blessing to chop it up with you as always, and the door is always open in the future, so don't hesitate to ask. For those of you listening, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of The Fork in the Road. Are you ready to talk about some conservation, Tyler?
Heck yeah.
Okay, heck yeah, let's go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, another day. Nope, gotta keep that light on, too dark. Another day, another conversation. The second season of The Fork in the Road has been the most hectic thing in the world, and I love it so much. So I'm very grateful that my friend Tyler is here to join the chaos and hopefully help teach you guys a thing or two, or at least help teach me a thing or two. So how's it going, Tyler? What's up?
Oh, it's going grand. Just working on my 5th semester here at Augustana, so keeping busy, but happy to be here.
And how's school going, Tyler? Do you feel weird?
I feel old.
Yeah.
yeah. But it's been pretty good. I'm only in 2 classes this semester, so that's been nice. Keeping it a little more chill on the schoolwork end. But I've somehow managed to find enough things to fill up all my free time. So I'm still busy. But
you got to do something. If you're not doing schoolwork, you're playing basketball as well. But if you're not doing schoolwork, you got to do something.
Exactly. So, no, it's been good. Volunteering with Special Olympics and Boys and Girls Clubs.
Oh, that's good. Are you having fun?
Oh, it's so entertaining. Yeah, it's so much fun. Yeah, they're hilarious.
That's good. And that's once a week, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not too much. It's a 5th year best year. Come on.
Exactly. Victory lap.
Let's go. Okay. Yeah. So part of your victory lap is going to be sitting with us. Today, we're going to be talking about the ethics of conservation, and the guiding question that I gave Tyler and I for this episode is, do we owe it to anyone, ourselves, future generations, etc., to conserve the planet and its resources? So, just to start us off, get the ball rolling, how about you try and answer that question, Tyler? Just
I have to
blindly.
Oh, all right. This is where I feel like there's different schools of thought.
Okay.
So it depends on your view on the Earth. So I was going to get into this later with the talks about culture.
Well, don't spoil it. Just do a little.
But in my mind, yes, we owe it to the planet. We owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to the future generations to conserve the Earth, because we only have one, and we need it.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we try and conserve it?
Yeah, I think that was apt, and hopefully you will expand upon that and give the people reasons to see why you think that way, because that's really the goal here. I don't really care if you agree with us or not. I just care that you see why we think the way we do, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I mean, because we could be wrong. Well, I don't believe we're wrong, but we could wake up 10 days from now and somebody puts out an article that debunks everything we've learned in the 4 years we've been in university, 5 years we've been in university. So It's just the way she goes. All right, so to start us off, we're going to be talking about sustainability. So sustainability, as I understand it, is a huge, broad catch-all term, but for the purpose of our episode, we're going to be looking at sustainability as a forward-looking community that is normatively respectful of the pursuit and perpetuation of knowledge. In this case, the knowledge is concerning the ethics of conservation. So somebody who is quote-unquote sustainable is actively consuming the knowledge concerning the ethics of conservation, and trying to live their life according to those ethics. So, I mean, it's not necessarily a lifestyle, but I think it's a good way just to check your balances, if you get where I'm coming from.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could argue it's a bit of a... It turns into a lifestyle.
Yeah, exactly.
It's, yeah. But it is definitely a point of view, and you have to, get your opinion and your understanding there first, and then it kind of just morphs into a bit of a lifestyle.
I think if you're taking it that far, obviously you need to understand what's behind it. So one of the biggest philosophies in these ethics of conservation is pragmatism. So pragmatists in conservation biology have a faith in countless new observations and improvements in our ability to learn and our ability to self-reflect, because this leads to conservation. Like, that form of thinking leads to conservation. So I don't know, what do you think about that, Tyler, when it comes to our improvements in our ability to learn and our ability to be self-reflective, just kind of falling into the idea of conservation?
So what you're saying is basically the more we learn and the more we self-reflect, the more we realize that we need to conserve.
Right.
Is that
exactly.
Kind of what you're getting at?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's true, right? If you think about it, the more you start learning about how much we're pillaging the earth, and the more you start reflecting on how much waste that we produce and how it's even changed over the last 50 to 100 years, I think the more you realize that we can't keep going at the pace that we're going, right? Trash doesn't just disappear; it has to go somewhere.
Exactly.
And so I think, I would agree with that. Like, the more you find out about it, the more concerning it almost becomes.
Mm-hmm. And we're not putting this out here, like, this isn't supposed to be fear-mongering. That is not, that's the opposite of goal number one. This isn't, you're not supposed to listen to this and be like, oh, well, the earth is dying, I might as well go rob a bank, and then, like, exactly, just don't, in our esteem, the reason why you do something like this is to put awareness out into the world, to try and get people involved in it. Because me, myself, I'm going into education. I'm not going to work in a lab. But some of these people who want to work in a lab, they might not even know it yet. So if you have any interest in science and then you listen to this episode and you're like, yes, I think it's important to conserve the earth, and consider studying this stuff, because Tyler and I did, and we had a great time. I'm not going to speak for you, but...
Oh no, I always enjoy learning about the earth. That's why I'm in biology.
Okay, so from my notes I'm jumping ahead. So if you're paying attention to climate sciences or to ocean science, then you know the human impact we've left on the earth already and how much it's accelerating. Just like Tyler said, we're basically killing our life source a day at a time. And it's not like we aren't putting efforts forth. So one thing that I've heard in one of Jordan Peterson's talks is that since we've become cognizant of the climate issue, of racial inequality, of gender inequality, etc., we've done things to fix it. And everybody's like, well, it's not fast enough and it's not enough. And that's true. But it's not like we're not making change. So I'm not saying change isn't happening, but at the rate we're moving, the same way Tyler is saying, it's not sustainable for us to keep going this way. So from my notes in conservation biology, the class I took at the University of Alberta, the carbon dioxide levels are unprecedented in the last million years. The CO2 emissions in 2000 were around 380 parts per million, and in 2019, that's bumped up to 400 parts per million. The increase in temperature annually from 2000 has gone from 0.5 degree Celsius to more than 1 degree Celsius per year. And as the carbon in the atmosphere increases, it traps more heat in the atmosphere, and our planet gets hotter. So that becomes like a huge issue when we're killing all of our CO2 reclaimers and chopping down all these trees. So, like, who's going to absorb the CO2 that's been put in the atmosphere, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's important to note with those statistics, because I feel like the argument that you hear a lot is, oh, well, the Earth goes through these natural changes, right? So this is just a natural variation in the carbon dioxide. But I'm pretty sure, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we have proven in the last 10 or so years that it is from human emissions. Like, humans are affecting the carbon dioxide levels, and we are increasing them. And that's what's causing us to see these increases in temperature.
I can't speak exactly to what you said, but I know it's true because from what I've learned in my marine biology class, the way they date ice in the poles is they measure the CO2 levels, right? And the CO2 levels, since humans have become like the primary, that apex predator, for lack of a better term, on Earth, and as our society has evolved, especially since the Industrial Revolution, the CO2 numbers in the ice, like in the frozen in the bubbles in the ice, are like levels and levels higher than they were in the past. So yes, exactly what you're saying is the truth, man. Like, our cars, heating all these houses, like, the more people we produce, the more CO2 we're going to produce. So for us to sustain our lifestyle, we need to put as much effort into remedying the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in speaking of ocean science, in my marine biology class, we learned as temperature rises, that causes glacial melting, and this glacial melting raises sea levels and decreases the concentration of salt in the ocean, and it also raises the shorelines. But this salt decrease and the increase of temperature in the atmosphere, which also warms the oceans, I don't know enough about waves to explain it to you, but I believe that is how it works. I don't know. I'm still learning. But this increase in temperature in the water plus the salt concentration decrease is going to alter the Great Ocean Conveyor Belt, because it changes the thermocline, which is the temperature, and the halocline, which is the salinity gradients in the ocean, which doesn't allow our oceans to mix. So what do you know about ocean mixing, Tyler? Like, do you know that to be an important process? I can answer these questions.
I was just going to ask you what the ocean conveyor belt was.
Okay, so yeah, the Great Ocean Conveyor Belt is basically the thermocline, so temperature, and the salt, the halocline gradients in the oceans. They change the density of water. So cold, salty water is thicker than warm, fresh water. So that causes cold, salty water to sink. So in places where it's warmer, like around the equator, there's going to be currents that are moving in directions of high temperature because it's warm there, to cold temperature because the cold water sinks, right? And that creates the mixing of the oceans of the entire globe, is the Great Conveyor Belt. There's two very big currents a part of it, and I can't remember them off by name, so I'm not going to try and name them right now. But this mixing of the oceans is like essential to our life on Earth, because if the mixing doesn't happen, well, then the nutrients that the fish need, the nutrients that the what are they called? The plankton need, who the plankton feed the fish and the fish feed us. That's just like a small food web. Like the amount of food webs in the ocean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That type of mixing disappearing, the nutrients are going to stop mixing. That's going to affect our soil. It's going to affect our, what are they called? Produce growth and our crop growth. All of these things are connected. So, when I asked you what you know about ocean mixing, this is me explaining to you about ocean mixing. The likely disaster scenario, if all of this didn't happen, is that all the ocean life dies because they aren't used to the temperature increases that are happening in the ocean because the CO2 increase in the atmosphere. Whale falls end up happening. So a whale fall is when a whale dies and it sinks to the bottom of the ocean and starts decomposing. That is a huge source of methane, and that increases methane levels in the ocean. So if the whale falls were occurring, but for every single marine mammal was dying simultaneously, our ocean would be flammable like gasoline, So this is a likely disaster scenario, end of the world situation, but I'm just saying it's all connected. So how do you feel if it's very important for us as human beings who are increasing the levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that affect these biological processes? How do you feel we should care about these things? Should we be taking this as a daily thing in the forefront of our mind? It's like, hey, I should try and produce less CO2 today.
I think it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you're conscious about constantly. I think honestly the biggest thing is we just have to change our culture around it, right? Like if we can make small daily changes, that can make a huge difference in the long run. So things like making recycling easier so that more people can do it, right? Right now it's just so much easier to throw that piece of plastic in the trash than try and recycle it. But if we can change that culture and get it so that it's easy for people to do these things, I think stuff like that can make a huge difference.
And I think those type of changes, correct me if you believe I'm wrong, happen first. Obviously, the science needs to say it works, which to my knowledge it does, but I can't just bring up a paper. I'm not loaded like that. I'm sorry. But from there, it needs to be a governmental shift. Like the parties we elect need to start caring about the environment, or that reflects we don't care about the environment, right?
Yeah. So yeah, for sure. And I think we're starting to move that way. Like I know Canada is banning all single-use plastics within the next couple of years. So
that's huge.
Things like that is a start. I think the problem when you go to bureaucracy is it's slow, right? It always takes time to get things done.
Yes.
But
the problem is you have to jump through so much red tape, but we have to do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So.
Yeah. So if we're following the pragmatic philosophy, just like Tyler said, we have to, like, a cultural shift has to happen. And for that cultural shift to happen, first step in that is providing the knowledge. So we're trying to provide the knowledge right now.
We're starting the shift.
Yeah,
we're making the wave.
Come on. So next we're going to talk about what do we owe to the future and how we should decide, like, what we value as good environmentally and in terms of conservation biology to help conserve the planet for future generations. So what the research has shown is that we've been teaching our kids to build a city on a hill for as long as Western society has lived. And when I say that, I mean we've only emphasized passing on moral, cultural, spiritual, and economic lessons to future generations. Each generation should add to or protect the economic capital base it inherited is like a general rule when it comes to economics. As people, why not translate that to an environmental rule as well? Without our Earth, the economic base doesn't exist, right?
Yeah, and that's the tough balance I think that you have to find, right? Because right now exploiting the environment is probably the quickest way to get rich, right? Like, it takes money to be sustainable. So right now for a company, they look at it and they go, well, I can make way more money if I don't cut my CO2 emissions. And I think it's trying to see that we should do this for the future. But I think a lot of people are selfish and greedy, right? You do it to get money for yourself now because that's what everybody else is doing. Yeah.
See, and that's where I agree with you, and it's very interesting because the next point is that our westernized way of looking at the world, I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm saying we need to adopt other notions. So like under indigenous ways of knowing, this is a paraphrase from Dr. Dwayne Donald, who's a U Alberta professor. Each action we take is in the interest of 7 generations in the future, using the lessons and the knowledge of the 7 past generations. And this is under Indigenous ways of knowing. In conservation philosophy, it says that biodiversity, which is the variety of living things in any given area, management at the continental level should be the goal, and the goal should be to maintain and restore the greatest authentic total diversity possible. And you might be asking, well, what about the cost? And I will give you a very apt answer. I'm not a business major. Leave that to the business majors. We're just getting the ball rolling, bro.
Yeah, and I think that's what we can start to realize is that there is money in being environmental, right? We control the economy, right? We can decide what we value. So if we decide to value recycling, and we decide to value using recycled materials instead of using the cheapest stuff you can find, then I think we can shift that culture, right? And I think I wanted to add one thing about owing the future generation something, because I think it's an interesting thing, because it's hard to think in that sense, because they can't give us anything back.
Right.
So it's kind of this idea of, well, why do I owe the future generation anything? Because they can't do anything for me. So why would I save the planet for someone else when I can get rich now and I can live a better life now? And that's going to affect me. What they do in the future, that's their problem. Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of, like you said, that's a cultural thing, especially in Western philosophy, this idea that we don't owe the future generation anything because they can't give us anything back. So I think I really like the Indigenous way of putting it. I think that's very, very interesting.
Yeah, and the one thing that I would say to that is what those future generations do give you is legacy. And I'm sure legacy means a lot less nowadays than it did, say, in like the days of King George II. I know nothing about history, but I'm assuming he was very old and that was a very long time ago. But the moral of the story is like, I see where you're coming from, Tyler, because you need to look at both sides of the story, of course. But this is me pleading for a cultural shift, because we've been, for years, I would say since, from my knowledge, like the 1930s onwards, we've been pushing this capitalist, individualist lifestyle. And of course, we have improved. Society has improved. But I think we can be doing better. And the conversation that I've had aloud, at least over the last 4 years, let's say, has tended to agree to me. Like, there may be something more. And I'm not saying there aren't advantages to capitalism. Get rich, man. I don't want people not to be able to get rich. But I do want people not to be able to cut corners when it comes to the environment to get rich.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to the thing of the problem can be the solution, right? So if we change the culture around capitalism to one that's focused on sustainability, we'll find a way to get rich through that.
Exactly, right? People are people, man. People are always going to find ways to make money. I tell you that much. Holy. Yeah. So, the next question that I want to ask you, Tyler, is natural awareness a necessary quality for being a good human being, in your opinion? Like, you know what natural awareness means, so I don't know.
Like just being like aware of nature around you and realizing that you're part of nature?
Yeah, and like the impact you leave on nature and nature has on you, exactly.
I mean, I guess it kind of depends on what you define by a good human being. Mm-hmm. But I think it's definitely important, and I think we might be a little biased because we're biology majors. So we have this sort of view to realize that we are part of the earth, right? Yeah. This is we're not separate. We're not something above it. Like, this is still our home. We're part of an ecosystem on the earth. Mm-hmm. So I think in environmental terms, yes, it's very, very important if you're going to be a good person to have this natural awareness and realize that you're part of the environment around you.
I think for me, man, I agree with you in simple terms. Yes. I think exactly what you said. It depends on what your definition of a good person is. But in my purview, especially now, if you're not concerned about the natural world, well, the natural world is alive to me, and that makes me think, obviously this is a bit of a logical leap, but that you don't care about life, because just because you care about human life and your human life does not mean you care about life in general. And I think if people live their lives reciprocating more, because you can't reciprocate every single thing that you take from the earth. I don't think that's physically possible. If we gave as much as we could for every single thing that we took, I don't know if that's doable, just because we need to work, we need to go to school, we need to, etc., right? But if you're putting time or money into making the world a better place, then you're fine. For example, the people who are like tree planting for $35 an hour in BC, yes, you're making bank, you're putting in some money for your future, but you're also saving the planet, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So I think in the world that I'd like to deviate away from, which is that one being centered around consumerism, then yes, like our atrophied natural relationships and greed are like a root cause of the problems that we're seeing in the natural world. So I think we need to change the way we look at them. We teach our kids that sharing is caring and not to take more than they need, but we aren't sharing with Mother Earth, and we're pushing her to the line.
Yeah.
I think if you think of the Earth as an egg, for years we've been putting pressure on the very top and the very bottom of the egg, and it's fine because that's not going to crack. But the problem is, since around about 2000, which sucks because we were born in 2000, we started moving our finger down, and now we're putting the pressure not on the complete northern pole of the egg, and that's a problem.
Yeah, actually, I think I looked, and we talked about this in an environmental studies class, just to give you a little more peace of mind. I think it was around 1970 where we kind of passed the threshold of being sustainable.
Okay,
So
that does help my
my
brain a little bit.
Using more than the Earth could
Sustain.
make in a year,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah.
So now we need to talk about the impact of individual conservation action. And the guiding question for this section is, does recycling within our homes really make a difference? So I'm going to try and answer that right off the bat. The individual recycling, and this is biased because I've done the research, but the individual recycling within our homes, like me saying the Taylor family is a family that recycles and me and my mom do recycle, does not make a difference on the grand scheme of things. But one household out of the almost 8 billion on Earth not letting plastic end up where it cannot be reused is not compounding the issue. So in that sense, yes, I think it makes a difference. Do you see it differently, Tyler?
I think I get what you're saying, right? If you look in the grand scheme of things, one household not recycling, is not going to make a difference. But if every household is recycling, then yes, we are making a difference. So it's still important for everybody to try and recycle and not get that attitude of kind of, I don't want to say complacency, but just this idea that like, oh, it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things because I'm just not producing that much, so it can go in the ocean and it'll be fine. Because obviously we see what happens when everybody has that attitude, and then we get a chunk of garbage the size of Texas in the ocean.
And don't worry, we'll talk about the chunk of garbage in the ocean the size of Texas. Don't worry, we'll get there. I think it's very important, I don't know, for us to change that culture, to make it more welcoming, to say, if you disagree with us, that's fine. But science has been telling us for years now that conservation is needed. Philosophy is now starting to change its conversation to be more conservation focused. Science, technology, education, and math in education fields is now being changed, at least in the Canadian ones I'm being educated under, to science, technology, society, and the environment, because environmental action is vital. It's vital, man. So talking about sustainability and ecosystem health, in terms of recycling plastic, like I was saying, it isn't a concern of really making an individual difference, in my opinion. If we increase the amount of plastic waste that we recycle, we reduce the amount of plastic waste entering the environment. And if everyone lived by a certain standard, we could dramatically reduce the environmental impacts, like physical harm to wildlife, chemical leaching, and the alteration of soil structure. And every single one of those we could talk about for hours, about the impacts of what those things are going to do, bro. So everybody's always like, how does this affect me? Well, Tyler, for an example, how does the physical presence of those 6-ring cans in the ocean affect you? Over a couple of long jumps, obviously, because it's got to go through a couple of species.
Oh, yeah, you're asking the loaded questions.
Yeah, come on.
Obviously, it's not like a direct effect on your daily life. Right? We've done a pretty good job of hiding a lot of our garbage and putting it into places where we don't see it and stuff like that, so that it's not affecting our everyday lives. But I think the main thing is to realize that we can't hide it forever.
Right.
So, yes, one plastic can in the ocean isn't going to affect my life, but if we get enough plastic cans in the ocean that we start killing the ocean, like you said, that's going to affect my life.
Yep.
And if we get, I think it's important also, like we focused on the ocean a lot, but I think it's also important to realize that the garbage we produce here, what we do with it here isn't necessarily better. Like just burying it in the ground,
no,
not really a better solution. That's going to affect the water, the soil, like everything.
Yep.
So I think that's a much more approachable, or not approachable problem, but much more maybe relevant to us in Alberta because we are landlocked, right? We don't have the ocean beside us, but the garbage that we produce is not going to a better place.
Exactly. So talking about the trash problem in general, that's why people, like, all of the cities in the world should now have a black bin for garbage, a blue bin for paper recycling, and a green bin for compost. If you don't have a compost bin, then as a community, you're lacking. Because for us to do what Tyler's claiming we need to do, which we do need to do, the paper needs to go where the paper needs to go. The recycling, plastic recycling, which has a bunch of numbers. There's 1 through like 8, I believe. So you got to know your numbers.
Yeah.
Needs to go where it has to go. And then the food waste. Bro, we could just make fertilizer and make more food. Don't throw your food scraps out. Compost them.
Yeah.
Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to right at the beginning of culture, right? We haven't made, like obviously recycling cans is worthwhile because you get some money out of it, right? Look at how many people recycle cans because you get 10 cents for every pop can. But things like plastic, we've just kind of become accustomed to throwing it out, and it's so much easier just to throw it out, right? So I think that's where we need the culture shift and start teaching kids early to make it such a habit that you just recycle plastic. You don't throw it out. Like it doesn't go in the garbage. Like it's like a can, right? And I think if we can get to that point, then we can see hopefully a lot of benefits.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, I'm not really worried about the generations younger than us because they're being educated on the stuff that we were educated on. And I think if, obviously, like you said earlier, Tyler, we're a little biased because we spent the last 5 years learning about this type of stuff. But I do still think environmental education was kind of a focus of mine growing up because I wouldn't care about it otherwise, you know? Because where else am I going to learn about it, you know?
Yeah.
It's not like we're watching cartoons about how to save the planet. Well, I mean, maybe we are, but...
Yeah. And I think we are seeing that shift throughout our generation, and even like my parents are actually quite good at recycling, and my mom has a massive garden. And stuff like that, right? So I think we are seeing that shift, which is good to see. I guess it's hard to talk because we're confined to a pretty limited part of the earth, so it's hard to see the shift in terms of everywhere, but it's a start, I guess.